Chapter 4. Ashley was stunned by the anger on Brett's face as he sat in the driver's seat of the SUV and questioned her about Ethan. A pang of guilt filled her chest as she debated whether or not to tell him the truth. She longed to come clean, ached to open her heart to him and share everything that had happened in her life, but she just wasn't ready to face the memories. Wasn't yet strong enough to answer the questions she knew her fiance would ask. She thought about the parole hearing. If she couldn't convince the board to keep Ethan in prison, which she was determined to do, wouldn't it be best to leave everything in the past? Finding out about her previous life wouldn't help Brett. It would only cause him pain. Ethan is a man. Ethan is a man I was with for a while, she said, looking directly into Brett's eyes. So you mean an ex? Duh, what else? Yes. She watched his face as he processed the information, hoping he wouldn't become even more irate. Brett nodded. Okay, so why haven't you ever told me about him? He asked, indignation clear in his voice. Have you told me about every single one of your old girlfriends? She shot back. He stared at her, his eyes narrowed. It was a long time ago when I was really young, she explained. It was stupid. I was stupid. I just didn't see the point in telling you. If it was so long ago, then why did Shane bring him up now? Ashley considered her words before she spoke, and careful to explain without actually lying. Because he may be coming back into town soon, she said. So, your brothers want you to get back together with him? Brett stated. That's what this is all about? She wondered what Brett would think if he knew the truth, that her family would prefer to see Ethan dead. No, they don't, she assured him. It's just some local gossip. It doesn't matter. Okay, fine. But after today, I don't think I want your brothers at our wedding, Brett announced, his voice firm. Although Ashley realized her fiancé was livid, she hadn't expected him to banish Kyle and Shane from the wedding. The event would be the most important day in her life. In no way could she condone her brother's behavior, but they were still her family, and she couldn't really imagine a day without them there. Are you serious? She asked, hoping he would change his mind once he calmed down. Kyle and Shane planned the whole thing with the deer in advance, he told her. They gutted it in front of me on purpose. Then they tried to feed it to me. They wanted me to get sick. And then Shane brings up your ex-boyfriend just itching to start a fight? How did you expect me to feel? Ashley knew her fiancé was probably right about the buck. It sounded like the type of stunt her brothers would pull on someone they disliked. They could have dressed the deer in the forest instead of waiting until they brought it to the house. The sight of a deer having its internal organs removed had the power to make even those used to seeing it a little nauseous, herself included. She's seen more than one man throw up after watching the heart being pulled out. And Shane never should have mentioned Ethan. It would take her a long time to forgive him for bringing up her ex-husband, especially since he knew Brett was unaware of her first marriage. And yet, but they're still my family, she said. Her fiancé's nostrils flared as he shook his head. Ashley realized her reluctance to exclude her brothers from the wedding had made her husband-to-be even more incensed. Brett started the SUV and made a U-turn in Spencer's driveway, kicking up a cyclone of dust. He fixed his focus straight ahead, his jaw rigid, traveling faster than advisable down the bumpy dirt drive. She wondered what he was thinking, if he believed her words regarding Ethan. As they drove out of Metler Ridge in silence, Ashley was hit with the ominous feeling that this was the beginning of the end of her life with Brett. Ashley felt a thick wall of tension between herself and Brett as they sat propped in their king-size bed, each staring at their laptops. She tried to concentrate on the screen in front of her, knowing she needed to finish her thesis, but it was no use. She kept stealing glances at her fiance as he typed away, putting together a portfolio for a potential client. She wished he would put down his work and talk to her. They barely spoken at all during the course of the evening. He hadn't given he hadn't given her the silent treatment. He had been polite, but he was far from his normal attentive self. Since their disagreement about Ethan on the way home from her father's house, it was as though he retreated into his own little world, hanging up a no trespassing sign, making sure she couldn't enter. Red flag. Closing her laptop, she glanced at the clock. Almost 10:30. She inched towards Brett and pressed her cheek against his shoulders. How much longer are you going to be? She asked, hoping they could patch things up. She was careful to enunciate her words as she spoke. Brett had remarked that her southern drawl had sounded unusually strong during their trip to Metler Ridge. Now she made an effort to keep her mountain accent in check. Not sure. You should go to sleep, he told her, his body rigid and his voice flat. His rebuff tore at her heart. He clearly wasn't interested in repairing the void tonight. Wishing she knew the right words to say to coax him out of his icy shell, she scooted back to her side of the bed. The threat of her ex-husband being released from prison had already shattered Ashley's nerves before Brett heard Ethan's name mentioned. She wondered if her fiancé had picked up on her emotions. Maybe he could feel her anxiety. Not being aware of the source, he might think that she still harbored romantic feelings for her ex. Brett had never been much of a jealous type in the past. If he somehow tapped into her fear, realizing something was wrong, but not knowing what, it could explain his reaction to hearing she had an ex he didn't previously know about. She worried Ethan might still drive a wedge between herself and Brett, even if he remained behind bars. And there was the whole incident with Kyle, Shane, and the Buck. Should she have called her brothers out right there in front of Brett, demanding they apologize for the stunt? She wondered whether her fiancé was angry that she hadn't taken a firmer stand against their behavior. Or perhaps because he became nauseated, he felt less of a man in the eyes of her family, which would definitely add to his hostility. Maybe Brett had decided that he didn't want her family in his life at all. He already stated his desire to keep Kyle and Shane out of the wedding. What if he was reconsidering his proposal? Could he be thinking that marrying someone with her background, with a family so polar opposite from his own, would prove to be a colossal mistake? Now, with Brett shutting her out, she wasn't sure who the biggest threat to her happiness was, her family or Ethan. Ashley opened her laptop again and checked her email. She sent a message to the parole board inquiring about the time of her ex-husband's hearing. So far, she hadn't heard anything back. At this point, she feared she wouldn't. She pulled up the parole board's website. She scoured the site earlier searching for the hearing schedule. There was a link for the schedule in the main menu, but each time she clicked on it, she had been directed to an error message. She clicked again just to make sure. 404, page not found. She wondered how long she had left to prepare. Her statement to the parole board had to be perfect. It would be painful recalling the memories, but she had to be strong. She had to tell them everything that happened the day Ethan had tried to kill her. And the worst part, he would be there watching her. The thought of being in the same room with that monster again terrified her. But what choice did she have? She had to make sure that Ethan was never allowed to hurt her again. Feeling the bed move, she glanced over at Brett. He closed his laptop, slid it onto the nightstand, and switched off his bedside lamp. "Good night," he said, pulling the covers up over his shoulder and turning his back towards her. She stared at him. No goodnight kiss? Except for the few instances where he'd been away traveling for business, would be the first night since they moved in together that he hadn't kissed her before going to sleep. "Good night," she replied, trying to keep her sadness from being reflected in her voice. A knot formed in her throat. She had to figure out a way to make things right with Brett before it was too late, before they started growing apart. Turning out the light on her nightstand, she slid beneath the covers. She lay in the darkness, facing the back of her sleeping fiancé, listening to him breathe on the other side of the wide gulf between them. She had just started to drift off to sleep when she realized she had forgotten to plug her cell into the charger. She reached across the nightstand in the darkness, found her phone, and unlocked it. She decided to check her email one last time. She noticed that something had been sent to her spam folder earlier in the day. She clicked it open. It was from the prison board. Ethan's hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. See you in chapter 5.